How can you do this?
David turned and looked at us with a look of shock, fear, just complete. It was just unbelievable. Unbelievable.
How ironic that the one man in the world who never struck her, who was the kindest to her of anyone probably in the whole world, he's convicted of her murder. And I thought, how unjust.
To the 12 people who sat in the courtroom every day and heard firsthand of all the evidence and the witnesses that were presented, they had no doubt. Guilty.
Former State's Attorney Richard M. Daley had been criticized for allowing the Dowaliby case to go forward. Now, as mayor of Chicago, he defended the decision, saying that, quote, "A lot of people doubted the investigation and the indictment, but those professional trial lawyers did an outstanding job." Still, many observers were stunned that the jury had not found room for reasonable doubt.
They had no evidence, but I guess it didn't matter. They had to convict somebody.
In an interview with a newspaper reporter, the jury forewoman made an extraordinary revelation about the verdict. She said these evidence photos, which showed fist marks in the door of Davy Dowaliby's room, were critical to their decision. But neither the prosecution nor the defense had ever even mentioned the marks. Nonetheless, the jury had apparently leapt to the conclusion that Dowaliby had a vicious temper, often punched the walls, and certainly could have murdered his daughter.
They considered things that were in evidence but weren't argued by either side. You never really know what they are going to seize and use to acquit or convict.
As it turned out, the marks had absolutely no relevance to the case. They had been made years earlier, long before the couple had moved into the home.
The foreman of the jury basically said that she based her conclusion that David Dowaliby must be guilty on the fact that this was a house of great violence. Now that is disgraceful.
The forewoman also said that if the jury had been given the chance, they would have convicted Cynthia as well. The Dowalibys hoped these revelations about the unfounded biases of the jury might affect David's sentencing, and maybe even convince the judge to overturn the verdict. In June 1990, the Dowalibys broke their media silence.
It was like a psychological war, and the media was part of that war. I mean, we were used probably by both sides.
I wanted to scream, shout, go to every house and say, look, we didn't do this. You know, someone did this to us.
Cynthia gave an interview to the Chicago Tribune. David spoke from prison. Both insisted they were innocent. David said he was devastated that he had not woken up when his daughter was abducted.
David felt guilty that he had been in such a sound sleep that he let the perpetrator literally slip under his nose.
The media barrage did no good. In July, the judge went forward with sentencing. David Dowaliby received 45 years in the Stateville Maximum Security Prison in Joliet, Illinois. In July 1990, David Dowaliby was sentenced to 45 years in prison for murdering his daughter Jacqueline. But the weakness of the prosecution case had led many to question whether David was guilty. His wife Cynthia had been acquitted of the same crime. Friends of the Dowalibys formed the Freedom Committee to work for David's release. One member offered a $10,000 reward for information about Jacqueline's real killer. Peggy O'Connor led the group.
We got a 1-800 hotline number for anybody who would have any evidence, who knew who did this, because we always believed that somebody knows what happened to her. Somebody knows something. They just got to find the courage to speak out. And from there, we were able to meet people who could help us.
One of those people was Chicago attorney Robert Byman. At first, he didn't believe the Dowaliby story.
I was cynical, I think, for the same reason that everyone else that read the press was. But as I got to know more about the facts, and as I got to know the Dowalibys, I realized that they were incapable of having done any harm to their daughter.
Since the family was now nearly destitute, Byman's law firm agreed to handle the appeal for free. The attorney scoured the trial transcripts to plot a strategy.
What I was looking for was the evidence that had allowed this case to go to the jury, and I couldn't find it. There was no evidence that actually proved guilt. What convicted David Dowaliby was human nature. The human nature of 12 good people sitting in a box, seeing that something terrible has happened to a little girl and wanting to do something about it. Their choices were to go away and keep the mystery open and say, "Sorry, Jacqueline, we can't do anything for you," or convict the only person in front of them.
On June 12, 1991, Byman presented David Dowaliby's case before the Illinois Appellate Court. Public interest was so great that for the first time in the court's history, a television camera was allowed to record the proceedings. Murder convictions are notoriously difficult to overturn. The higher courts are not inclined to tamper with a jury's decision. Even so, Byman was confident.
The goal was outright reversal. When you say exoneration, you can't get that. You can't get the appellate court to say, "And we think he was innocent." All they can do is say he wasn't proven guilty. But yes, we were going for outright reversal. Our fallback position was a new trial.
It wouldn't be easy. The three appellate judges bristled at Byman's suggestion that the state unfairly targeted David and Cynthia Dowaliby.
I wish you'd spend a little time on that. Is it not a reasonable inference that someone in that household, either the mother or the father, had something to do with this girl's death?
No, Your Honor, it is not a reasonable inference. The state still has to come forward with some proof, not merely inferences. There was no direct proof that David Dowaliby did anything before or during the disappearance of his daughter, other than come home and go to bed.
The judges also criticized the prosecution, questioning its decision to show the jury 17 photographs of Jacqueline's decomposed body.
Does it illustrate the character of the weapon that might have been used, or the means or the manner used? They don't show that, do they?
Yes, it does. It does in the sense that it excludes, for instance, a gunshot wound. It does in the sense that it excludes, for instance, a knife, as best as we can.
No. You can look at these pictures all day long, and you can't tell whether there's a gunshot wound.
Well,
these pictures barely show a human being, counsel.
Most appellate hearings last 20 minutes. Cynthia watched nervously as her husband's hearing dragged on for 2.5 hours. The court had three options: affirm the conviction, order a new trial, or reverse the decision outright, meaning David could never be retried for his daughter's murder. The opinion came down 5 months later, in October 1991. The judges ruled that, quote, "Though there are many unanswered questions, the totality of the evidence is not sufficient to prove David guilty." David Dowaliby had won an outright reversal.
We were on cloud nine. David was able to call us at the house, and we were all screaming and jumping and hugging and kissing each other, and it was like, oh my God, somebody believed us.
On November 13th, 1991, after spending 18 months in prison, David Dowaliby was released.
I've been practicing law for 30 years now. I've had 2 or 3 times when I felt as good as I did the day that I walked David Dowaliby out of prison. Our system is designed to work in 90 to 95% of the cases. The system didn't work in this case. It convicted the wrong man.
The unanswered questions in the murder of Jacqueline Dowaliby linger. Her murder is unsolved. For the investigators, David Dowaliby's release was a bitter pill. Many are certain that he and his wife Cynthia killed their daughter.
There's
never been an indication to me throughout all this process, through all these reviews, that anyone else other than the mother and father were responsible for the death of Jacqueline Dowaliby.
This is a highly unusual case, and it had a lot of interesting twists and turns to it, and everybody got to scrutinize it 6 different ways from Sunday, and there still is no agreement as to what the appropriate verdict ought to have been in the case.
Mayor Richard M. Daley, who oversaw the investigation as Cook County State's Attorney, was invited to give his opinion in a press conference. He sarcastically replied, quote, "I guess appellate courts can do whatever they want. Maybe we should do away with juries." For the Dowalibys and their supporters, there is no vindication. They say Jacqueline's killer is still out there. Unless someone volunteers information about the crime, it will remain a mystery.
She didn't deserve what happened to her. She was just a little girl, just a normal little girl. And I know, somebody knows what happened to her.
More Crime and Punishment, same time tomorrow. Next, it's 1920 in Cornwall, and a couple are found bludgeoned to death outside their home. But who's the killer? Murder Most File investigates. And don't forget, there's always a second chance to see programmes on Crime and Investigation +1. That's on Sky Channel 554.